Welcome. Please have a seat. Haven't already done so. My name is Ryken Grattet. I'm a research fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California, and thank you for joining us today for this event on the topic of alternatives to incarceration in California. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, PPIC is a nonprofit independent research institute. We have offices here in Sacramento as well as in San Francisco. Today's event is brought to you by the James Irvine Foundation funding, and we'd like to thank them for making this possible. You should have on your chair found a packet of materials. First is the report that will be the subject of the presentation today. It's called Alternatives to Incarceration in California. But there's also two other fact sheets that are recent PPIC publications, one on the changing prison population and another on California's county jails. And all of these publications, as well as the briefing slides for the presentation today, will be available on our website, which is easy to remember. It's ppic.org. You'll also find an agenda for today's program that has speaker bios in it on the backside, and so please have a look at those. That'll save us some time in terms of doing introductions. There's also a confidential evaluation form. It wouldn't be a PPIC event if we didn't collect data from you. So there's a survey in there. Please fill that out. Those are very useful for us in terms of improving our events. And then a couple of other things before we begin. We have an event focused on corrections later this month. My colleague Magnus Lovstrom will talk about a new PPIC report that will be coming out on California crime trends. That'll be on May 21st here in this very same room. And then finally, I would ask that you save yourself an embarrassing event by turning off your cell phone ringer. So now on to the program. So it's kind of interesting and timely that we're talking about the subject of alternatives to incarceration. As many of you know, incarceration rates have been declining in a number of places throughout the United States, including California. Just in the last week, major presidential candidates have made speeches. An edited volume came out from New York University Press, which contained essays written by a number of leaders, including presidential candidates, on the topic of crime and correctional policy. Public opinion really has started to shift towards an emphasis on lessening the reliance on custody. And there's been a number of events really just in the last day or so that also bring attention to this issue. This morning there was a press conference over at the Capitol that was about the topic of lessening the reliance of custody for mentally ill offenders. Down in Southern California this afternoon will be another event that's in relation to the National Research Council's report from last year on the growth of incarceration in the United States, which will also have a major focus on the topic of alternatives to incarceration. So all to say really that the issue of alternatives to custody as a response to criminal offending is very much at the forefront of a lot of discussions today in California and throughout the country. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brandon, who will provide an overview of the research report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryken. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming today. I'm going to highlight some of our findings from our recent report on alternatives to incarceration, and this is collaborative work with Ryken. Correctional systems in California face several challenges that make it important to discuss alternatives to incarceration. Jail populations are on the rise. Since the enactment of public safety realignment in late 2011 to June of 2014, we've seen an increase of nearly 11,000 inmates in the county jails across the state. Also, we still currently are under a federal court order to reduce our prison population to 137.5% of design capacity by early 2016. Voter-approved Proposition 47 last fall is helping bring down the prison and jail populations, but we believe that there will still be long-term jail and prison population pressures going forward. And finally, we are historically at a high of spending on corrections at the state level. The state prison system makes up just over 9% of the general fund budget, which is in comparison to a yearly average of around 3% during the 1970s. I want to take a moment to describe and explain exactly what we mean when we say alternatives to incarceration for this piece. It's a very broad term. Alternatives are punishment or treatment that does not involve long-term confinement in a secure facility or a jail or prison. Alternatives that we look at in this piece can be used at the time of sentencing or during community supervision. Community supervision here, I mean under the control of the county sheriff or county probation department. And finally, alternatives can be established as a matter of law and policy, result from discretionary decision-making by local officials such as district attorneys, sheriffs, and judges, and also at the initiative of the offender. For example, if an offender applies for work release or work furlough, that's on his own initiative for the application. I want to now turn to alternatives currently in use in California. When we look at alternatives in California, the state does have alternatives that they use for female inmates, and they also use alternatives when it comes to dealing with non-compliance of parolees. But most of the action that we see in terms of alternatives and the wide-ranging array of programs of alternatives occur at the county level. State statute specifically gives counties the flexibility to use alternatives, mentioning specifically home detention and work release. Home detention allows inmates to spend their sentence outside of a secure facility, normally in designated areas that are monitored by tracking software. Work release gives the offender the ability to work on sheriff-designated community projects out in the community in return for custody credits. It is crucial to remember that the county has full discretion in establishment, eligibility, rules, and administrative fees for these alternative programs. Public safety created and promoted two other new alternatives for the state, the first being split sentencing. Split sentencing occurs at the time of sentencing for realigned offenders newly sentenced under Penal Code Section 1170H. That's a long-winded way to say that this is the non-serious, non-violent, non-sexual offenses that were part of public safety realignment that now spend their sentence in county jail, where before realignment they spent their time in state prison. Judges have full discretion in how they split the sentence in terms of the time that an individual spends in incarceration and the time that they spend out under community supervision. Finally, flash incarceration is an alternative that occurs during community supervision. It involves using short periods of incarceration, no more than 10 days, to punish non-compliant behavior without extending or altering the offender's community supervision. Once again, non-compliance is also a broad term, but when we look at things that might cause someone to be flashed, we're talking about failed drug tests, failures to appear for programming, failures to appear for check-ins with the probation officer, and even possibly when you leave your confined space when you're on electronic monitoring. So there isn't a large amount of statewide data that lets us know how many individuals in counties are under these alternative custody programs. Since realignment, there has been some data collection that gives us a glimpse, and so this figure here looks at the number of newly convicted realigned offenders that are sentenced to county jail, the 1170H sentence, that have been released in a given month to a sheriff's alternative custody program. And this is the statewide number that we aggregated up from the county information. What we see is that the ACP releases increased up until May of 2013 and then has remained steady since then, anywhere between 300 and 400 a month. Now this number is actually quite small, but it's a limited population that we're looking at. To give you some context, in June of 2014, the jail population statewide was over 83,000. To give you another frame of context, counties in the last few months of 2014 were releasing over 5,000 sentenced inmates early because of jail overcrowding. And so this is a very small number, but this is the data that we have. Clearly, counties are using alternatives to incarceration. We just don't have available statewide data on the use of electronic monitoring and day reporting centers and the like. Now moving to split sentencing. Counties are using split sentencing, and it has been increasing over time, but there is wide variation across the counties. The statewide average increased from 27% of newly convicted realigned felons receiving a split sentence in 2012 to 32% in 2013. Like I said, there is wide variation across the counties, and counties are starting to use it more. For example, Los Angeles County had a split rate of around 4% in 2012, and it actually decreased to under 2% in 2013. But if you look at more recent data and changes that have occurred in Los Angeles County, they are making progress. The most recent data we have is for September 2014, and they're now around just over 13% of split sentences. Looking specifically at the figure, we see that counties in the lowest category of split sentence rates of less than 25% decreased from 2012 to 2013, and counties that have the highest rate of 75% or higher increased from 2012 to 2013. Finally, we should see usage of split sentencing increase, as now state law as of January 1st, 2015 makes a split sentence the default sentence for newly realigned offenders sentenced to county jail. Now that we've had a chance to look at some of the data we analyzed from the state, we also took a deep look at the key questions and key research questions that have been looked at in the wider research literature regarding incarceration and alternatives. The first question is, does incarceration reduce crime? Research finds that incarceration does reduce crime, but that reduction in crime rates varies based on the incarceration rate. Looking at historical changes in incarceration rates and historical changes in crime rates, research finds that on the average, the effectiveness in prison in reducing crime rates diminishes as the incarceration rate increases. Basically, at higher rates of incarceration, we see a diminishing gain in the reduction of crime rates when you increase incarceration rates. It also makes sense to take a look at the post-release outcomes of offenders that have been sentenced and spend their sentence incarcerated in a secure facility versus the offenders that are sentenced to a community-based program. What we find is that several recent studies show that individuals incarcerated do no better than individuals serving a sentence in community supervision, which is important given that, on average, community supervision programs tend to cost less than incarceration. Finally, we also take a close look at the research that is looking at these specific alternative programs. And what we find is that there are some traits of effective alternatives. The first being, it looks like that programs that use intensive supervision and swift responses to non-compliant behavior produce better outcomes. So one big example of that is Project Hope in Hawaii. There's also other examples in North Carolina as well. And so these programs are using what's commonly called in the literature swift, certain, and short sanctions to punish noncompliance of the offenders in these programs. And when we say short, we really do mean short. I mean, the sanction can be hours or days instead of weeks and months that might have occurred under prior processes with violations. Also, we see that research has been done on programs that use targeted services, so programs that take into account the risk and need of the offender and then tailor the program that offender is in and the services that offender receives is more effective than other programs. And finally, effective implementation is key. Running a program without the right combination of intensive supervision and swift responses and also targeted services might not produce the best results. So if you can have those together, that's crucial. Finally, our report also looks at what we might be able to do or what we need to do to be able to assess the effectiveness of alternatives being run in California. Public safety gave the freedom and flexibility of, public safety realignment gave the freedom and flexibility for counties to choose the alternatives and other programs that they want based on their needs. So there was no sort of blanket of programs required that the counties had to use. They were able to choose on their own. That being said, because there's 58 counties maybe doing 5 or 6 things 58 different ways, we don't actually have detailed information on all the programs being used across the state. And we definitely don't have information on the characteristics of the offenders, the program characteristics, and the program and post-program outcomes that are occurring across these county programs. And so we would recommend for counties that have the ability to use intensive data collection so the county leaders and research can look at the effectiveness of these programs and hopefully be able to share the traits of their successful programs and the effectiveness of their successful programs to other counties and other states for that matter. At this point, I would be happy to answer 1 or 2 quick clarification questions if anyone has them on the presentation. If not, we'll move on to the panel discussion. Okay. If there's any other substantive questions, please feel free to ask them to Ryken or I later on during the other question and answer period. Thank you, and at this time I would like to invite our panelists up and also Ryken to come back up as the moderator.
Thank you, Brandon. So it's my pleasure to welcome the panelists to the front here. Let me just do brief introductions. In the middle is Jeremy Verinsky, who's the undersheriff, Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Office. To his left is Carol Paris. She's the Assistant Probation Division Chief for the Sacramento Probation Department. And on the far end is Robin Harrington, who's Chief Deputy Warden for Female Offender Programs and Services and Special Housing for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And thank you all for joining us here today. I want to start with kind of a big picture question. So here we are kind of in a moment where the use of alternatives to custody is sort of more appealing. There's more public support for it. Where the reliance on custody seems to be declining somewhat in California and across the nation. All of you have a kind of a unique perspective sort of in that process, sitting in agencies. And I'm just kind of wondering sort of how the experiment is going from your point of view, from where you sit. We'll start with Jeremy in terms of responding to that.
Certainly. So at the time of public safety realignment in 2011, I was a lieutenant and assigned to our main jail. I was the commander there. And at that time, we were running, much like the state was, we were running between 120 and 130% of capacity before realignment came down. And so as the bill was making its way through the legislature, we knew we had a problem coming because there was no way we were going to be able to absorb the impact of that with the realigned offenders now serving time in county jail without doing something. We were already overbooked, as it were, at the hotel. So we started working on our alternatives to custody, and we went through a number of different things, and we'll probably talk more about that. But added some programs and really looked at what we were doing to help manage our population. It's so far we've been very successful with that, and it's been a good thing. We implemented a number of meetings with our local community called Smart on Crime ahead of the prison realignment, where we talked about what the impacts were as far as we knew, our educated guess what they were going to be in our community. We talked about what our responses were, and we found that our community really supported the idea of incarcerating the right people for the right offenses, the people that needed to be in custody, as opposed to just carrying on business as usual, incarcerating folks that, well, we arrested them for something, so, we'll just leave them in jail until the court process finishes up, and then we'll figure out what to do with them. So we really focused on reducing our pretrial population to the extent that we could, and then on the back end, where I came in on the Alternatives to Custody program, addressing, how once folks were sentenced, the need for them to remain in custody, in physical custody, versus being able to serve their sentence in the community, maintain their housing, maintain their jobs, and all these other things that are crucial to re-entering or staying connected with society and being successful once their custody term is complete.
Thanks. Carol, your perspective?
Oh, sure. I think even prior to realignment with SB 678, which was incentive funding to support evidence-based practices in the community for probationers to reduce the number of probationers returning to custody, I think probation was involved in that and got a taste of that, and using some of that incentive to create our adult day reporting centers in our community, and with that a model of assessment, treatment, programming, supervision, and accountability. And we really worked on developing the model that we wanted to work with, looking at providing those assessments and targeting the needs of the offenders that are coming through along with the risk, and then targeting that with the supervision we were providing along with the programming so that it matched. One thing that in doing that, since with realignment, we've expanded the adult day reporting centers to provide more programming in the community in Sacramento. And we have been tracking the entrance rates for the risk assessments of people coming in the door when they first come in, and then when they exit. Looking at that, we've had a 44% reduction in risk scores, which is encouraging, I think, pointing to some of the successes we're having in the program. And part of my overview is also with our collaborative courts and the expansion of collaborative courts in Sacramento County. We currently have a drug court, a mental health court, a veterans court. We're currently working on a co-occurring court in regards to providing services to individuals in the community rather than in custody, and if they can complete the programming that they need to do in the community, any time that's stayed with the court. Basically, they go in and if they've committed a crime, that time is stayed, that if they would have been serving in custody is stayed, and if they can complete the program, then those charges are dismissed and that custody is not served, so it's saving it in that way. Just as an example, in 2013, our adult drug court, just looking at the people that graduated from the program's about a year to a year and a half, and looking at the numbers, the people that came through, just of the graduates, there was approximately 24 years of county jail time that was dismissed along with the cases that because of their successful completion in the program. We had about 9 years of state prison time that was also dismissed and not served in custody because they were in programming and being successful there. So.
Well, great, thank you. Robin, your perspective.
So the Department of Corrections did basically the same thing. What they before the realignment, we partnered with external stakeholders and national recognized experts to do assessments prior when the offender came to prison. That way, we had a better option and outlook in terms of how to give them the rehabilitative needs and the reentry needs necessary to make them successful. Because obviously, going from jail, they actually, when they make it to prison, it was important that we did assessments on the onset. So that was fairly new for us. And then once we assessed them, we again developed programs and processes to get them ready for reentry. And hence we have the alternative custody program, which we'll talk about. But again, we partnered with external stakeholders, previous offenders and their families, and to determine what was the pathway, how they got there, and what we needed to do while they were in custody to help them transition back out with the skill set that they may not have had. So with that realignment, so the realignment, obviously our numbers are lower because they're not coming to prison. And so our population is probably half of what it was at a few years back. So 2011, 2010, our population is now half of what it was back then.
So, Jeremy, I want to follow up with you on a particular issue. So, Santa Cruz County is very well known to have relied on alternative custody since well before realignment. What are the kinds of strategies and programs that are kind of currently in use, and how have they expanded after realignment?
Yeah, so before realignment, I'm not going to lie, we stole a lot of ideas from our probation partners in Santa Cruz County. So they really did some good work with pretrial and risk assessments and those types of things. And so as we were putting our program together, we were definitely taking a look at that. And we were fortunate to work with some different organizations, the Laura and John Arnold Foundation, the Pew MacArthur Foundation, with some different initiatives addressing risk and needs assessment tools. The Results First initiative through the Pew MacArthur, assessing the actual results. So we're putting a lot of money into different types of programming. Where are we getting our most bang for our buck? And if we're not seeing the results that we're expecting, are we delivering the program incorrectly, or do we need to shift funding to a different program that's more successful with the limited dollars that we have that are available? So we worked on a number of those different things in planning our response strategy. We had in place for many years a work release program. We're a relatively small, geographically sized county, second smallest in the state, San Francisco being the only one that's smaller than us geographically. But we had 54 different sites that I ran as the lieutenant there, 54 different sites of work release, and it's everything from working with gray bears, the senior organization, to the county parks, graffiti abatement, obviously Caltrans picking up trash on the side of the road. But we had a fairly robust program around work release. What we didn't have was the home detention component of it. And so that was really the big area of growth for us, is adding the home detention program. We were able to do that and monitor inmates that would have been serving time in custody. But our home detention really was targeted, and it was program based. We weren't putting people out on a monitor so they could sit at home playing Xbox all day. We were putting people out on a monitor with a plan that was based around what their needs were, what their risk factors were. There were programming that they were going to be attending while they were out of custody, and we were checking up and making sure that they were doing that. And also there was a job component as well. We expected them to be productive and working. If they didn't have a job, that would be part of their programming, is working on job training and skills building. But then they would also, report to one of those 54 sites that we already had in place for our work release program, and work at one of those sites if they weren't able to find gainful employment, but we would put them to work doing those things as well. So that was really the area of growth for us, was the electronic home detention monitoring program. We had a program of county parole as well that we'd used over the years, but in a limited fashion. We weren't using that to a great extent. And so we revisited that as well. There were some changes in the law that allowed us to, extend the time in which somebody could be out on county parole, and that gave us some additional flexibility to work with our offenders to reintegrate them back into society through what we set up and what we called our tiered incarceration plan. So even the worst of the worst for us at the local level, they might start in custody. We would try to get them directed into programming, assess what their needs are, and then reduce them into a home detention program, and then possibly onto county parole, and then of course be released from supervision altogether. So that was kind of the take that we took on it with all of our inmates that come in. That's the path that we try to get them into. We realize that one day, we're going to open the door and we're going to let them go at some point. They're not going to stay with us forever. And so the things that we can do, while they're in custody, while they're under our supervision, to help, prepare them for a successful transition, the better off we all are. So.
Thanks. So Carol, I want to ask you specifically about alternatives to custody in response to probation violations. As you know, one of the big drivers of the pressure on the prison system prior to realignment was the practice of returning offenders who had violated the terms of their parole back into prison. And I'm curious, sort of, what are some of the strategies that Sacramento uses to respond to probation violators in ways that sort of conserve the precious resource of the jail bed?
Great, yeah. I think our first strategy is to engage early, sometimes even before the individual is released from custody, and reduce barriers to successful reintegration into the community. So basically, to prevent the violation of probation from happening in the first place. So we have two really innovative programs that we've started. We have our intake officers we have 7 local prisons that they will go to, meet with the post-release community supervision client before release, talk to them about any specific needs that they might have before they're released, looking at where they're going to live, if they have any kind of housing issues. And we actually, with that program, we have a 95% show-up rate, if you will, in regards to those people getting released and actually showing up at our probation office. We also just started with the Sacramento Sheriff's Department program in which mandatory supervision clients, as well as post-release community supervision clients, upon release, they're actually transported directly from our Rio Consumnes Correctional Facility to our probation office, eliminating any gaps. I think it's trying to counteract those days of the person being released at 1 o'clock in the morning, maybe was arrested with no shoes and is out, and then we're trying to embrace that person and get them with us so that we can provide. So at the intake, when they bring them directly from the in custody, we then have an eligibility specialist on site that will determine, are they eligible for Medi-Cal, or do they have disability benefits that they could utilize. We have a registered nurse to look at any medical issues. We have a probation officer that will assess and determine which programming would be best for their needs. They have a clothes closet there. And so that's kind of some innovative programs we've done to kind of reach out and touch those people before. I mentioned the Adult Day Reporting Center. If individuals get to our Adult Day Reporting Center, we have 3 located geographically through Sacramento in the north, south, and central areas to prevent the barriers of accessibility to be able to get to the program. So if somebody's there, they're violating like some condition of their conditions, what we look at is first community safety. Is this person a threat to the community safety? And if so, we'll look at putting that person into custody for that reason. But we have a whole different varieties of things that we do, and we try to match it to what the behavior is. So if we have somebody that's testing positive for drugs, then we're going to increase drug testing. We're maybe refer them to drug counseling. So we have increased supervision, somebody that's not showing up to counseling into the programming when they should be, then increased supervision, electronic monitoring, GPS. We have flash incarcerations, which were mentioned earlier, that just kind of a timeout of like, hey, you need to get in line and you need to do whatever it is that hadn't been complied with, and just a short period of time to get them into custody and kind of get their attention. We have Adult Work Project as an alternative to putting them in custody. And what's great about that program is that they can earn $24 a day. When they do that, as a sanction, goes directly towards victim restitution. We'd set up contracts in the community. That money goes directly to the victim, and it's really working out well. We have a high-risk drug treatment program, which is a model based on both enforcement and treatment. We have a mental health counselor that's there working with the officers on site. And if it's determined that an individual needs outpatient treatment, residential treatment, they work together in tandem to make that happen. And sometimes what we do, if there's somebody that's violating, the drug testing and just can't make what the compliance is, they can have the option of you're going to go into treatment or you're going to go into custody for like a flash period of time. So it's working with the client, trying to help them achieve results. The collaborative courts, we have a reentry court that is geared towards the mandatory supervision population after a split sentence. The PRCS clients, the drug court, mental health court, a veterans court, and an up-and-coming co-occurring court. One of the things that we're doing in the collaborative courts, the drug court, it's an incentive that we have for people that have transportation issues, if they can come into the program, they're participating, they're doing a good job, they've submitted 6 negative drug tests, then they earn a bicycle from the program to help with their transportation needs. So there's a lot of different things going on with the model. It's basically assessment, treatment, supervision, accountability, and support.
Well, thanks. So Robin, CDCR's had an alternative custody program for female offenders for a while now. It hasn't been the focus of a lot of attention, I don't think. Perhaps you can give us a little bit of an overview of the program, how it was created, why it was created, and sort of from your perspective how it works.
Sure. Like I mentioned earlier, in 2008, CDCR partnered with a whole host of folks to develop a blueprint or a model for female offenders, if you will. And within that, there's obviously the experts who study female offenders. And there's a component in there that really talks about the continuum of reentry and the continuum of self-help and rehabilitative programs. And what Department of Corrections has done is initiate 2 programs, the alternative custody program, where a female offender can apply through the initiative Brandon mentioned earlier, can apply for a program, and she has 24 months or less to serve. She's nonviolent, and she also has case factors that allow her to go to the alternative program, which is electronically monitored. Both of the programs that we have are electronically monitored. And so in this program, while she's out, and she can apply for 3 different types of programs. One is home resident. So if she has started working in terms of her rehabilitation and there are services that she can get on her own within her resident, then she could apply for that. And if she's eligible, she could actually go continue on in her own resident. Then there's also a private program. If she's eligible and she wants to go into a private alternative custody program, we look and make sure everything meets the criteria for that program to provide those, again, ongoing services that we've already identified through assessment that she will need. And then we also have the third program is basically a FOLTEP, which is a female offender training and employment program, which is still a state program, but she can live there, earn money, work, continue on getting those rehabilitative services while she's out working and doing those things in that type of program. 24 months to serve with, or 44, or no more or no less than 45 days. Criteria, we bring them in front of a committee because obviously public safety is first and foremost important to make sure she's eligible. Criteria, case factors, maybe she has children or things that she needs to work on, and that program must provide that. Then we have what we call an enhanced alternative custody program, a little bit different, whereas there's a little serious and violence in terms of their commitment offense. However, 24 months to serve, again, no less than 45 days. We look at the same assessment. We make sure there's an individualized treatment rehabilitative plan, that we make sure that the clinical social worker has worked with this person, has identified the services they need, the continuum services they need within this program, and it is not one of those programs where she can go home. This is more of it's in the community. It's a phased program. So she starts out dealing with the orientation of why she got to prison, how she got to prison, what services that are needed. So it's a continuum from when she left the institution. Then she phases to the next program where she has ability to go out, maybe do a lit lab, and they can go to school. It's very monitored. And then the third phase, they can continue on and get work. Within this program, they have to save 75% of their income that they make while they're there to help them transition. And I was just in the program, I just want to share, on Tuesday. And one of the offenders had already saved $2,400. That is significant to go home to transition to parole versus the $200 you normally get when you get to the gate. So also getting work skills and getting how to communicate. Some of them have been in prison for 13, 15 years. So it's significant to transition them to parole or to the community, as opposed to, just, after doing all that time, just, again, transitioning them home. So this is a continuum of care, a continuum of the rehabilitative program, and all of this is thoroughly documented in terms of the assessment, from the assessment when they got there to when they're leaving to where they continue. All the parole is very heavily involved in terms of making sure that they get to those services that we've identified, and we identify the local services of where they're paroling to, not just you need to take a class, but there's a class on this block, on this street, and you need to, enroll. So it's still supervised, but again, they're out in the community transitioning back to society. So that's the ACP and the CCTRP.
Thank you. So I want to throw out a question that anyone can answer, because it's quite generic to the subject matter. Of course, the issue of relying on alternatives to custodial settings for offenders always raises the issue of how do you minimize the risk to the public safety? And I'm kind of curious from any of you who wants to answer, what are the steps that you take to minimize that risk? Do you track the outcomes so that you can be sure that you're managing that risk appropriately? And how do you do that?
So, if I may.
Go ahead.
Again, what we do initially is we take a look at the case factors. It is a classification committee. So we are looking at, again, the type of crime the individual committed and if they're even eligible for the program. And then we have in our programs the electronic device where the parole agent is monitoring, the offender's behavior, where they're going, and also giving them the leeway to go out into the community and make it back. So they have curfews. So we actually track their movement on a daily basis, and to make sure that they are going to the places they're supposed to go, that they're authorized to go, and also coming back in a timely manner. So it's very supervised in that sense.
Sure, I'll take it. I think that Jeremy said it earlier, is that we know that everyone's going to be released, for the most part, is going to be released from custody at some point. And I think that how we manage is the things that we've already talked about here today in regards to the programming, the supervision, the accountability, and the risk assessment of looking at, we use the level of service case management inventory tool, which has several domains that targets what's the risk for this individual to reoffend, and then also identifies the criminogenic needs that person has. And then we target our supervision, like the level of supervision that we provide to those results. So if somebody's showing a high risk and has a lot of needs, we're going to provide a lot of supervision, a lot of programming, and really base it on what their needs are. So it's not a cookie cutter approach to when somebody comes through the door, one size fits all for, say, our adult day reporting centers. We have an entire team that works with that individuals. We have case managers, probation officers, we have medical personnel, we have mental health specialists that are looking at that person and seeing what's their highest need, and let's target that first. And if they're a risk, let's provide supervision. Let's be out making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it's a blended model so that we have just that component of the assessment, treatment, and supervision and accountability all together working, because with one without the other, they might be effective in some capacity by themselves, but together they're really, really quite strong.
Great. Let me throw out another general question. I'll let you have a take at this, Jeremy. Do you have estimates of kind of how much you're saving by using alternatives? Is there some way that you can quantify, what's gained in terms of cost savings?
Well, yeah, certainly we look at just from a jail bed days perspective, and we track those, as opposed to if somebody gets a 2-year local sentence, if we put them out into alternative custody environment, we know how many bed days we saved, over the course of their sentence, and so we can track, what our operating costs are for the jail bed days. So that's a direct savings that we see as a benefit to the county, and that's something that we go in We estimate, again, we're a smaller county, but we estimate, we've saved over $3 million, to our county budget in direct costs for just in jail bed day savings. But there's larger cost savings, to the community as well. I spoke earlier about, the need to, integrate people or maintain their housing, their employment, and things of this issue. And in the old system where we, incarcerated somebody, we locked them up until the day they were released, and they were given, that fine jail suitcase, the garbage bag, green garbage bag, and a bus ticket, and told, go forth and sin no more. We didn't set people up for failure. At the time of their arrest, they were probably didn't set people up for success, I should say. At the time of the arrest, they probably had, some place to live. They may or may not have had a job. And again, we're dealing with low-level offenders at the county jail level. So we're typically dealing with a DUI arrest or something like that. Somebody that serves 6-8 months, but that's long enough for them to lose their housing. They're not paying their rent anymore. They've lost their job. No employee is going to hold their job for that long, even if they're a really good employee usually. And they walk out the door with the clothes on their back, and they're told to be successful and get back to work and be a productive member of society. If I can take somebody like that that's at a low risk of reoffense, I can supervise them appropriately, I can direct them into programs, as we've all been talking about, but I keep them integrated in the community. I put them back into their home before they lose their place that they're renting. I put them back into work at their job that they've had. They can maintain their stability as well. And so that's a cost that's almost impossible to calculate, is the residual or the ripple effects that we see by restoring people in a better, quicker and more easily back into the community, as opposed to separating them from what's the support system they had, and throwing them into the streets basically at the end of that. So there's other costs, I think, that are appreciable savings to the community. They're not going out on welfare. They're not ending up on Medicaid and those types of things. They can maintain all these things, and they're more successful as well. So I think there's additional benefits besides just the blank jail bed days that we save.
Interesting point. Anyone else want to speak to the cost question?
I just kind of tag teaming with Jeremy, like what he was saying, going back to the numbers I gave in regards to the collaborative courts, the amount of just jail beds that aren't used because people are getting services in the community and are being successful. I'm just going to give like one example of somebody that's come through our program. That I think you were trying to talk about, like the intangible effects of somebody who is successful, that we do get on the right path. And we had an individual that came in and had 40 years of meth use, and came in and had been in and out of prison for decades, had been in and out of county jail all around the entire United States, and came to our drug court program and was successful in it and graduated. And today he's been sober for 3 years, he's been crime-free for 3 years, and he's employed. And he actually now comes back to our program and volunteers, and just spoke at the Board of Supervisors to tell his story about where he came from and what the program did. And looking at that, we've created a person that's a tax-paying citizen, and there's some intangibles in that. And just touching on another thing, that we've got one other program that kind of helps with that. In regards to that intangible, like we have a job training program in Sacramento that's called the Northern California Construction Training Program, and we're out, and it's associated with our Adult Day Reporting Center. It's a vocational program in which people are learning skills. They're literally framing houses, doing electrical, plumbing. They're starting a welding program. They have a forklift certification. And so those people that get through the program and succeed, they're a number, but then they're out, and we actually are attached to localized unions go, and we have 90% of our people that get through that have a unionized job at the end of it. It's not just like going and working for McDonald's. Like, we're really out there producing some people that are giving back to the community after they come through our programs.
Okay, do you want to respond to that one too? The cost question?
Basically the same information. We have similar, if not the same type of programs and things of that nature, in terms of getting them ready for transition and to parole, and also to be successful. So on that, like she said, the intangible things are which we can't measure in dollars.
So we want to open it up now for questions from the audience. I would ask two favors. One, to ask a question or make a comment that's brief to allow for everyone who wants to ask questions to do so. And I also want you to hold off on your question until you have a microphone in front of you. So we'll start there.
Hi, is it on? Hi, I have a question. First, kudos to Sacramento County. Your day reporting center is one of the finest in the state, and I've visited several. Okay. I have a question for the sheriff. Since we continue to look at the ever-escalating unsentenced inmates, this report talks about them being 62%. Since we know most of them are minorities and poor folks, they would seem to be able, it would seem logical to me they could use those same services. Is there any move afoot to deal with the overcrowded, unsentenced? We release the sentenced inmate early to accommodate the unsentenced inmate. Is there anything afoot to look at trying to reverse that?
Well, actually, in Santa Cruz, we've had a pretrial release program that's run by our probation department in place for a number of years. And our pre-sentenced population, we run about 54%, so we're well below the state average, and that's something that we look at on a regular basis. In terms of misdemeanor offenders, our pretrial incarceration rate is roughly about 3 to 5% of our daily population. So almost none of the offenders in our custody are misdemeanor pre-sentenced individuals. So the folks that are in the pretrial state are generally awaiting felony charges. Makes it a little more problematic in terms of dealing with pretrial release. There's usually extensive bail, and the risk factors are obviously much higher, and level of violence is much higher. So public safety being a large concern, but those folks are assessed, as I said, by our probation department. For potential release, prior to their trial starting, and it's a huge issue. We don't want our justice system to be a pay-to-play system. Where folks that can afford to post bail can get out and be free, and we separate again some of those things that I was talking about. We separate people from their housing, from their employment, from all those other things, for the very simple reason that they're too poor to afford bail and go back to work. They're living paycheck to paycheck already, and this is just something that they can't absorb, the financial impact. So we want to make bail, and the pretrial release system a fair system that assesses them, for what their actual risk factors are, what the danger is to the community, and releases when appropriate, those folks, whether or not they can afford, the financial impact of that. We don't want, to run our jails based solely on their ability to pay the freight, so to speak.
Am I on? How important an issue is housing? You mentioned it in passing. And how successful have you been in addressing the needs of these subjects to obtain housing?
I guess that's for me again. Well, there's an initiative called Housing First, and it talks specifically about when you're trying to address we've all mentioned assessing folks for what their needs are, what their risk factors are, but one of the number one things that you see with particularly with this population, but even with the mental health population, the substance use population, is if they don't have a place to go home at night and lay down that's warm and dry and protects them from the elements and has food and the basic necessities of life, it's really hard to get them to be successful in anything else that we're trying to do with them. The programming, the job skill training, all that kind of stuff. If they're sleeping on the streets or living under the trees in the bushes and what have you, they're not going to show up for the job skills training. They're worried about where their next meal is going to come from. So personally, I believe that housing is very critical to this. It's one of the basic elements of life. Are we successful all the time at doing that? No. But as we look at our programs and what the choices that we're making, in Santa Cruz, that's one of the things that we're looking at expanding. is trying to find, housing placements for folks so that they transition somewhere. When we, again, I talked about the old way of just giving a garbage bag with their clothes on their back and kicking them out the door. But let's have a place for them to land and to go to. It helps with things like reporting to, their out of custody supervision and being successful there. It helps with, all those other things that we talked about, the job skills training and everything else. If they've got someplace to go and hang their coat at the end of the day. So I think it's very important.
So housing is not irrelevant to either of you two. So
It's really important, especially for female offenders who, most of them are the primary caregivers of their children. So when they transition back to the community, they will have their children. One of the great things about the ACP, again, is that they're able to work and develop a job skill and also employment. And as I mentioned earlier, the lady who's leaving with more than 24, because she still has time to do, but more than $2,400, that's significant. And so if it comes, first of all, there is a process in the program where we talk about housing and the community, and there is a liaison to help them with housing to transition back. But just having a down payment or having the first and last month or the security deposit if need be, or hooking them up with the resources in the county to help them with that process is significant. And that takes away a lot of the fear and anxiety that they have to go home and to start fresh with their children. So again, the ACP, the Alternative Custody Program, which allows them to make that money, to get those jobs, or to finish their education, or to start, is significant in terms of lowering their anxiety, get back in the community. So that's one of the great things about the program that we have there too.
And exactly the same. We have limited resources for we do have some with our Adult Day Reporting Center, our collaborative courts for transitional housing. However, I think that the importance of our case managers on site at those programs that also leverage community-based organizations or faith-based organizations that also provide services is one of the things that we do. But absolutely, if they don't have a place to live and stay that's sober, a lot of times they have friends, they get out, and then they have these environments that they go right back into where people are using drugs. They also have criminal behavior. If we can't get them out of that and into just an environment where they can get treatment and concentrate on changing, then it would be very, very difficult. So it is a key component. One thing we have found though, like the temporary, like they have like the 90-day stays for transitional living, is a lot of times we get clients that come to our programs that have alienated a lot of people, and so like their family members, their friends, they've manipulated, they've kind of with their behaviors, and so getting them in the program, getting them into a transitional housing, it's not like, well, you're gonna have to do that for years, because then what happens is they start changing their behavior, they start making inroads with relationships that they had in the past severed because of their criminality or their drug use, and then what happens, like maybe the 60-day mark, is you have a family member that comes forward and says, hey, they can stay with me, or there are other options that open up that then help transition until that person can get employed with one of our vocational programs. So it is definitely important.
Allow me to applaud all three panelists. It's a great presentation. I appreciate your help and support. The question is for Carol. I think you mentioned you had different courts. You had a vet court, a drug court, mental health court. Was there any other courts that I missed?
A reentry court as well.
A reentry court.
And
what happens when everybody fits in each one of the courts and there's cross-fertilization?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Well, what happens if a vet has some mental health issues and some other issues, then the classification and the segmentation, what do you do with them?
Basically, how it works for Veterans Court is that if an individual suffered trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of military service, and then is also eligible for veterans benefits, then, and also there's certain crimes that are looked at in regards to who would be eligible to come into the Veterans Court. But if they have a mental health, they'd be accepted, and we actually the Veterans Hospital and as all the treatment services we actually have a lot that we leverage, that they are providing resources due to their veteran status. So that if they have a mental health issue, they would be provided services if they do have the VA benefits.
Hi, so I know there was a big concern about the impact of Prop 47 on drug courts. And you mentioned that you work a lot with low-level offenders, but post Prop 47 there might be what were traditionally higher-level offenders, or at least people with more serious addiction. And I know that feature of drug courts is that they've been very selective in who they'll take. And so in terms of programs for treating addiction, they found that Prop 36 may be more successful in reaching some of those people with more serious addictions or long histories of criminal histories in relation to their addiction. Do you think we're going to see maybe some refunding of Prop 36 programs now that there'll be funds available through Prop 47?
To me.
I'm not sure about that. I think the savings on Prop 47 was specifically addressing or being sent to like mental health and some other issues along those lines. So I don't know if there was any earmarked for Prop 36 and drug court spending. It's something that is still brand new, relatively speaking to all of us, and it's something we're still assessing what the impacts are going to be there. There are some folks that say that it's actually harmful to the substance abuse offender because they're not seeing the consequences of their actions anymore that they used to see in the past, and there wasn't a clear path into court. Since most of these offenses are now misdemeanors, they're most often being cited and released out in the field, and they immediately return to the behavior that they were participating in. So we catch them with some drugs. They just got high. We give them a ticket and a court date, and they immediately go back and go get high again. As opposed to when they were incarcerated and then funneled into the drug courts, that would hopefully try to break up that cycle a little bit. So I don't know what the long-term impact of that'll be, but we'll find out, I guess.
And then just from the drug court perspective, with Proposition 47, our drug court only accepts moderate to high-risk offenders. So we've really widened our doors in regards to, I think in the past, there was some criticism that there's like cherry picking or that there's only certain groups. But so we accept moderate to high-risk offenders. With Prop 47 and its passage, we were at capacity when it passed. We were at 125 clients, and after the passage, we're right now at about 86. And I think a tribute to the program's success is that the people that were in the program when it was passed, the majority of them stayed in the program because I think they were invested in it. I think we had 2 people that that were like, I'm done, I'm going to walk out. But where the numbers have declined is in regards to the referrals to the drug court program. So because they're now misdemeanors, and a lot of times they're not even going to come to formal probation because they're going to be on formal probation if they're in our drug court. So it's the referrals to the program is where it's decreased, and so those services they're not going to be able to leverage. And then I know there's discussion about that it lacks now like the incentive and the carrot to kind of get that person, because people don't like to change behavior and they have to kind of incentivize that, and either we get with compliance or with programming. So it makes that's just a concern in regards to the lack of the carrot on that.
So I'll have a follow-up. You answered a lot of my questions, but so given that it sounds like there really has been an impact by Prop 47 on referrals to drug courts, are there alternatives being considered or ideas about how to get, because it sounds like they're very successful, how to get those folks who previously would have been referred to drug court to still participate in those programs without the incentives they had before?
Sure. And I think there's talks right now going on. I mean, it's relatively new in the implementation, and we don't know that that's what caused like those numbers to go down, the referral numbers to go down, but there is a correlation of some sort there. But there are talks right now in regards to what can we do, how can we look at the program, but it's a talk because one thing about collaborative courts is it's the public defender, it's the judge, it's the district attorney, County, it's probation, all working together for the best, the needs of the client. And so I think those discussions are in progress right now of looking at it. And I think also looking at what's the trend, not doing a knee-jerk reaction of like, that's what's happening, we're going to pull back on it, and looking at more systematically, like what actually is happening here, and is it going to be a long-term effect? Will there be a blip on a screen and then go back to kind of the way it was? I think we're still evaluating the impacts of it.
Hi, thank you. I heard you allude to VOC programs several times. Do you see traditional education programs, adult basic education or secondary education, as impacting the realignment alternatives at all, or are there any education models that you see as important or helping out in this process?
Well, from the custody side, I can say that we do every 3 to 5 years we do an assessment of our inmate population, and just in general and what their needs are, and so we've been tracking this for quite a while. But education, basic education, is definitely a need, and in terms of all the other things that we've talked about up here, in terms of getting a job and all those things, if you don't have a high school diploma, it's real tough to get one of those jobs, and so. That was actually something that we actually grew quite a bit in custody with the realigned offenders, because people are staying long enough for them to complete their GED programs, and some of them even do the regular high school diploma program through alternative high school training that we do through the COE right in custody. So, it's a big need. We're actually rolling a program out with our local community college, where we're starting to do college level courses in custody for those folks that have completed or already have their high school diploma, where they're actually working now on their AA degree as well, and starting to do that, because the better educated they are, the less likely they are to reoffend as well. Their job opportunities are much larger. We talked about the need for basic things like housing and whatnot, but having a social security card, having a high school diploma, having a government issued ID, if they're eligible to get their driver's license back, we do that. We actually do field trips to DMV and get them their driver's license. But if they're through their offenses or what have you, they're ineligible for their driver's license, at the very minimum the California identification card. And being able to put all that together on a resume, when they walk out the door, that gets them, a much better head start towards finding employment than, not having any high school education. They don't even have a social security card, in their possession. They don't know what their number is. All those things. They can't even fill out a basic job application at that point. So, yeah, educational programming is essential as well to the success.
Hi. Underlying a lot of this capability is the electronic surveillance, the anklets and whatever else you have, and I'm not aware of them. But is there some level of security in the system there that you feel that we still need to improve, or are there some glitches in terms of electronic surveillance, just the mechanics of it, that you as non-technical people in that area see pop up more often than in other types of glitches?
Really, not for the ACP, for the CDCR. We have a system that we've been using for a while, and it's EID, electronic in-home device, really captures their movement, and also we haven't had any major issues with the equipment or any glitches, if you will. In terms of this particular program, they are monitored, like I said, with the parole agent, and if should something arise, they know exactly what to do in terms of calling. But we really haven't seen anything on a large scale of any other, maybe you'll get a tamper, but if the participant is tampering with it, we'll get that signal that they're tampering with it. Other than that, we haven't really experienced any major issues with that EID.
Just to add that I don't know that we've ever experienced a failure with the device itself. The largest issue is if you select the wrong person and they simply cut off or remove the device.
But it tells you that, too.
Right, it tells you that
It
as soon
tells
as
you
it's
that.
been removed
Yeah.
or cut off, but at that point, obviously, they're out of supervision and, they take off and do whatever they're going to do. We've recovered all the devices. We're able to find them very easily, so we haven't lost a device yet. They like I said, they're pretty well foolproof at this point, but found one in somebody's freezer. I don't know if they thought that would disguise the signal enough that we wouldn't be able to track it or something. But yeah, when they cut it off, they threw it in the freezer. So yeah, but yeah, that's really the issue. Is if somebody decides that they're going to reoffend, and that they'll simply cut the device off. And like I said, we'll get an alert right away when that happens, and go find the device at least, and go rearrest the offender.
Did you want to add anything about electronic monitoring?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Questions? Other questions?
In these alternative programs, how many people get second and third chances before they really do end up doing time?
Oh, it's fine.
Go ahead.
I think the answer is it depends. It depends on what the behavior is in regards to, like I think I said earlier, like the community safety aspect. If there's behavior that is going to endanger somebody, then it's going to be a much quicker route to custody to make sure that is taken care of. So it depends on what the behavior is and if it poses any kind of a risk to the community.
Yeah, just tying into that, we developed a response matrix, and I'm sure probation and CDCR has a similar thing, based like she was saying on the level of offense, the severity, the risk to the public, and that sort of thing. So when somebody is out on our electronic monitoring home detention program, they're still technically a sentenced jail inmate, and so at any point in time we can just pick them up and say, hey, we're changing your housing location today. Instead of serving time in your living room, you're serving time in our jail cell. Because they still belong to us. So, but as we spoke, that's not the goal of this. The goal is to prepare them to reenter into society, and so we want to support them as best we can. We understand that there's going to be hiccups along the way, but we'll bring people in. There's no formal flash incarceration for somebody on electronic home detention. We basically run that same way, where if somebody's reoffending, we'll bring them in, house them for a couple of days, meet with them, reassess what their needs are, see if we can resolve some of the issues that are causing them to reoffend, and then try it again, put them back out. And so we'll base our response, like I said, on the severity of what's going on. If they're non-compliant, we'll bring them back into custody, and we'll start all over again and let them serve out the balance of their sentence or whatever they need to do. And we're also very cautious at the front end too, as to who is going to be released and who's eligible for these programs. So there's quite a bit of thought and assessment that goes into it before they go out. Again, as we've all said, safety of the community is paramount. But we want to make sure that we're reserving those jail beds for the folks that need to be in custody and need to be there to protect the community.
Hi, this is Kathy Jett with Cal Forward, and I just wanted to say a few things. One is that, Ryken, thank you so much for bringing this panel together, and I wanted to say how impressed I am with the state and the county in terms of the level of science you've applied over the past few years, and particularly to CDCR. I know the women's programs were always advanced.
Yes.
But what you're describing today is really a forward motion. I mean, women being able to save money when they're in prison is amazing. And for the sheriff and probation, would you say that you're the exception to the rule, or that your profession is advancing as you have over the past several years?
Well, I think certainly when prison realignment hit and came down, it was pretty clear to all of us at the county level that we're not going to be able to build our way out of this problem. The state proved that for us to a large degree that that wasn't going to be successful. So we had to find alternatives. California, Santa Cruz, we might have been a little further ahead, in some regard, because we had a history of dealing with some of these things. But I think you'll find that most of the counties in the state now understand, what we're talking about, understand, the need to be data driven in their, response to these issues. I think at the beginning there was a few counties that probably, said, hey, let's, keep locking people up. But I think most of them now have seen that that's not going to be successful, and they're, looking for, at counties that are maybe a little, ahead of them to model their programs and whatnot. I know we've had a number of counties come and tour, and talk to us about, what we're doing and what's been successful, and, try to work on some of the things that have worked for us. So our program, again, as I said at the beginning, it owes a lot to probation. We've got, a very good cooperation with them. We actually had probation officers embedded with our custody alternatives team that worked hand in hand with the supervision there, because many of our clients become their clients, with the split sentences and whatnot. So we may let them out, a few months early on their jail sentence time through their custody alternatives program, and they'll serve, several months with us supervising, and then next week they're serving with, somebody from Carol's, side of the house to supervise. And so we wanted that transition to be seamless as well. So our programs are collaboratively developed and collaboratively funded. So if you're in for example, a substance abuse programming that I've mandated you go to because you're in my custody, that you're going to keep going to that program next week when you start with probation as well. So there's no you don't stop and start and, oh well, we got to reassess your needs, and let's find the program that probation runs that maybe meets your needs, and so you start all over again. It's just one continuous thing. So we found that to be very effective, and I think other counties are starting to follow that as well.
Can I just add, thank you so much for that comment, because one of the things that people don't know is that CDCR is, especially for female offenders, have been ahead of the game for a long time. And I am particularly proud to be a part of the female offender programs and services. I've been with the corrections for 29 years, and this is by far one of the most advanced and uplifting programs, not just the ACP-CCTRP, but just where it's gone since the 2005 reorganization, and also the, just the collaboration with all the different entities. So CDCR has turned many, many corners a long time, and have been continuing to turn corners. And they don't pay me to say that. I say it because I lived it. They don't pay me to say it. I say it because I've been in, like I said, doing this for a long, long time, and have seen the different. I've seen it a different way, and I've worked with the men. So this is by far the best and brightest people are up in our Sacramento in developing these programs. So thank you so much for that.
And then. Absolutely. I think that there has been a shift, and a shift for the better in the way that we look at clients, but also the way we look at each other. I think that it's really opened our eyes that we really need to work together to be able to make change happen. And I think that's really been a great thing, kind of a side element that's developed from the shift in looking at the client in a different way and providing a program. And it's really successful. And in much the same way, we're working with our sheriff with the programming we have at Adult Day Reporting Center. If somebody's like attending counseling at their like level 2 of where they're at, and something happens and they go into custody, they actually go in because they're providing treatment, the same type of treatment in custody, and then they go in and work and say, hey, okay, this is where you're picking up, we're going to take off, and then when you leave custody, you're going to come back, and so you don't have to go back to the beginning and start all over again. So that collaboration, I think, has really made a lot of difference.
Yes.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you. For Ms. Harrington, given the post-realignment environment that we live in today, and the level of offender that remains at the state and at CDCR, can you conceive of a scenario where CDCR would maximize the usage of alternatives to custody any more so than you have already?
I can foresee that. I can see, because the program and what they put together in terms of treatment plans and how that would transition and what that would look like on the other end in terms of rehabilitation would be significant. And I probably won't be around to see that, but I could see where they make different look at different case factors and consider those.
Well, we've come to the end. I want to thank our panelists. It was an excellent discussion. I also want to thank Brandon. If you have not filled out your evaluation form, we would very much appreciate the feedback. The panelists will hang out for a few seconds after we adjourn here, as will Brandon and I if you have other questions. So thanks again for coming.
Thank you. Nice meeting you.